So how did it go on your grit test? Well, now that we know more about grit and we have determined our personal grit score, let's now discuss our score and, more importantly, how we might increase that grit score. So first, let's say a few words about the grit score itself from your test. Well, the first thing to remember about the grit score test is that it's very easy to cheat. And as a matter of fact, anyone can quickly figure out how to score higher on their grit test. A second more important point to remember about the grit score is that your standard of comparison when you're doing the score will vary, and that will depend on who you are comparing yourself with. And what this means is that your personal choice for comparing your grit score will in fact distort the results of the score. So the important point to remember here is that your grit score demonstrates evidence, and I emphasize the word evidence, of the gritty standards by which you hold yourself. And what this means is that your grit score can only be compared to the standard of comparison you have personally chosen to compare yourself with. If your standard of comparison is very high, then your grit score will reflect this. But if your standard is very low, the same will occur. So in other words, your grit score reflects your standard of comparison and your actual level of grit. So if you had a low score on the grit scale, you shouldn't quit, but you should ask yourself two questions. And the first question is, what standards have I used to judge my level of grit? And keep in mind that when doing that, you might have been too hard on yourself when judging your level of grit because of the high standards you judged yourself against. The second question to ask is, how do you feel about that score? If you don't care, don't worry about it. But if you do care, please remember that you can always increase your level of grit. And if you want to do that, you should pay particular attention to what we're going to say next in this video. Because Professor Ducksworth has some practical tips on how we can increase our grit score. And she puts these pieces of advice into 4 different steps that you and I can take to increase our grit. And those 4 steps are, number 1, identify and concentrate on a specific interest. To increase your grit score, you must identify and concentrate on a specific interest, because if you're not really interested about something, you're more likely to have less grit. And this is especially important when, for example, considering your career choices in the future. Interest can be important, and we can learn to be more interested. You must also remember that the interest you develop should be something that you think about every day, the next year, etc., and you remain interested. In fact, Angela says that identifying that interest should come first, because only from there will the remaining 3 steps reinforce your grit. So finding the right interest can take time and a lot of experimentation. So learn to experiment in identifying those interests, and also learn to stop when those experiments are not working, and stop at the right time so that you can then finally find time to identify the right interests. But remember, the process of identifying the right burning interest takes time and does require some effort. So you must put in the time and a little bit of grit. The second step for increasing your grit has to do with deliberate practice. And what deliberate practice means is that you should practice your burning interest a lot. And you should do this because we all know practice makes perfect. But the problem with practice is that it's a lot of hard work, and you have to be prepared for that in order to succeed. So to deal with that necessary hard work, it can be useful to break up the practice into manageable pieces, but you must remember that successful, deliberate practice does require a few things. The first is setting a stretch goal or something that's just beyond your reach at present, but is something you can reach with effort. The second is focusing. Focus means that you can block out all the distractions like mobile phones, social media, television, etc. Next, seek feedback. Feedback is important because gritty people have been found to be more interested in what they did wrong than what they did right. And remember, that feedback should be immediate and informative, and it should focus on what you've done wrong. And finally, reflecting and refining. And when reflecting, remember to consider what you've learned and what requires more work. Remember to repeat the reflection and refining until you've achieved your goal. The third step to increase your grit, according to Professor Ducksworth, is to increase your passion and develop a sense of higher purpose. In other words, how does the passion you're pursuing improve the world at large? Or how is it connected with other people? Purpose is, in fact, one of the most critical elements for success in life. So remember that. Without purpose, it's hard to have grit. And finally, the fourth step to increase grit is to overcome pessimism or negative thinking. And you can overcome pessimism or negative thinking by developing a growth mindset, or what you might call hope and optimism. In fact, hope must be ever present in your mind right from the beginning, because during your personal success journey, you'll always encounter challenges and roadblocks. And purpose will be the weapon that will allow you to overcome obstacles on that journey. And purpose simply means that you're continually developing yourself and investing in your personal development, like you're doing right now by participating in this boot camp. Purpose is important, development, etc. And finally, please remember that you must practice grit long enough for the benefits of that practice to become evident. Practice, practice, practice. Now I hope you understand the subject of grit and how it's linked to success, and I hope that you will remember Professor Ducksworth's success equation, which was 2 times G plus TS equals success. And that equation was based on talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. And it's important to also remember that effort counts twice in that equation. And effort counts twice when it comes to success. And that grit is the effort part of the success equation which Professor Ducksworth has given us. Grit, in fact, has been proven to predict success more reliably than even talent or intelligence. So no matter what your talent or skill level might be, you still must invest the necessary effort in order to increase your odds of success in your career. And high levels of grit can also help you to increase your level of confidence, develop a more positive attitude, practice self-restraint or self-control, and improve your performance. So that's worth thinking about. And most important, the good news is that anyone can become more gritty. But keep in mind that the values within an individual society do matter. For example, their attitude towards success and winning. Also, the presence of systemic barriers to success are important because societal and organizational values or processes can prevent success from occurring in your career. Wow, that was again a lot of information to absorb. The time is now up, so let's summarize in 3 simple lessons what you should take away from this session. Our 3 important lessons. The first lesson is that there's a formula for success. And that formula is 2 times G plus TS equals success. G in the formula is grit, T is talent, and S is skill. The second lesson is that other factors do come into play which can reinforce the positive effects of grit, and those factors are high levels of self-restraint and self-control, etc. And of course we have the external factors. And finally, the happy news for us all is that, number 3, anyone can become more gritty if they follow the steps that we outlined in this video. So now the next step for you is to complete Dr. Ducksworth's grit test if you've not already done it. And the average score on the grit test, by the way, was 3.6. But remember, the grit score comparison levels will depend on who you compare yourself with. So make sure you take the grit quiz, and whatever the results may be, please remember, having more grit can only help you in achieving success, whatever success might mean for you personally.